Is a second chainring even relevant in 2025? Maybe it's finally time to ditch that front derailleur. Hi everybody, Nick from TriRig here. Today I want to talk about the evolution of the 1x drivetrain, especially as it relates to the sport of triathlon. Personally, I've been a huge fan of the idea for a long time, back when it was considered the obviously wrong choice in our sport. And to be fair, the arguments against 1x drivetrains were stronger a long time ago. But as our sport has evolved and developed, both the acceptance of 1x drivetrains in triathlon, as well as the equipment to enable and support them, have vastly improved. So let's talk about what they are, how they've evolved, and why now is an incredible time to get rid of that second chainring. So backing up, what is a 1x drivetrain? Does it require a clutch? Is it for 10-teeth cassettes only? You might be confused with some of the terminology and the technology that has come up in the past few years, but the actual definition of a 1x drivetrain is simply any bicycle setup which lacks a front derailleur and relies solely on the rear derailleur to shift through the gears. For the sake of completeness, I'll mention that if you don't have a rear derailleur, that's no longer a 1x setup. That would be either a single-speed bicycle if it has a freewheel allowing you to coast, or a fixed-gear bicycle if there's no freewheel and the movement of the rear wheel is always connected to the movement of the cranks. A 1x drivetrain has a cassette with some number of gears and a rear derailleur to move through them, and a single front chainring. The name comes from the combination of gears, as determined by the cassette. If your cassette has 12 cogs, you've got a 1x12 drivetrain. If it has 13 cogs, it's 1x13, and so on. Back when I built my first 1x drivetrain, it had a paltry 11 gears in back. The range was somewhat limited. I think it was an 11x27 cluster mated to a 44-tooth front chainring. Its drivetrain components were all just stolen from 2x setups, with the exception of a custom-made chainring from Fiberlight. It didn't have any of today's fancy technology in terms of a derailleur fluid clutch, or narrow-wide tooth profiles, or variable angle chain lines, yet it was still more than enough for everything I needed it to do, and it was a fantastic bike to ride. The thing weighed all of 11 pounds and is still one of my favorite builds to this day. But what did I give up at the time compared to using technology today? Not much, but some of the significant things are, first, let's look at the gear range. The hardest gear on that bike was a 4411, which is easily going to spin out on a significant descent. Not a huge deal, but no one's going to win Kona on that gear ratio, especially coming down from Hawi. Next, the climbing gear still leaves a little bit to be desired. 4427 is still a lot of gear to be pushing when you're climbing up the foothills of Colorado. Moreover, because I was using regular 2x drivetrain components, it meant that there was going to be a little bit more chain slap and the occasional dropped chain, especially at the extreme ends of the gear range. At those extreme ends, the chain line isn't quite straight, meaning that you introduce some friction losses, which sap a little bit of your power. But overall, the build was a really nice balance of the options available at the time, and the best components given what existed. Today, there are better options, and you can not only reduce the compromises, but virtually eliminate them. If granularity of gearing is most important, but you still want a really strong descending gear, SRAM offers cassettes with a 10-tooth cog, which makes a big difference. If granularity is less important, but you still want a lot of range, you could use a larger ring up front and then a cluster as wide as 1042 in back, because we now have both the cassettes and the derailleurs to accommodate that wider range. But going that route, you'll be missing a lot of steps in between those gears that might be exactly where you want to live a lot of the time. Right here is a build that we recently did on a Cervelo P-Series frame. It has very race-oriented, but still middle-of-the-road gearing. It has a 50-tooth chainring with 12 gears in the back, ranging from 10 to 32 teeth. So this rig has a much stronger descending gear than that old rig I showed you earlier, but about the same climbing gear, and it doesn't really miss much in terms of granularity due to having more gears in total. In addition, SRAM's modern 1x derailleurs and chainrings do a lot to improve the 1x experience. The narrow-wide tooth profile and fluid clutch in back really do reduce and virtually eliminate chain slap and chain drops, meaning you can just focus on the ride. The derailleur geometry also pivots slightly as you go through the gear range, reducing drivetrain friction losses. All in all, modern 1x setups, and by that I really mean SRAM's products, really do eliminate what used to be a bit of hassle or compromise in 1x drivetrains. You get to remove that front derailleur, which has its own potential weight and aerodynamic savings, but you also get to forget about its existence. As you ride, all you have to think about is whether you want the gear to be harder or easier, and click the appropriate button. But let's not count out the front derailleur entirely. Shimano, for their part, has really doubled down on the double chainring. Their latest Di2 systems for a triathlon all, by default, operate in that same harder or easier mode that I just described, but they do it even with the front derailleur present. They just shift the front derailleur automatically depending on what gear you're in and which direction you're shifting. That's a pretty solid answer to the increased interest in one-by drivetrains. With Shimano's synchro shifting in place, you get the same no-brainer benefit that you have from one-by, but with the benefits of a true two-by system. The improved chain retention, lower drivetrain friction, more granular gears, and a wider total gear range. Personally, I still fall on the side of the one-by camp. I fell in love with the concept way before it was cool, and I'm not giving up on it now just because it actually is cool. I'm a total sucker for simplicity and elegance, and modern one-by bikes are just too beautiful not to love. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the one-by versus two-by craze, which aspects or compromises are most important to you, whether you've ditched the double ring yet, or whether you've tried but you couldn't live with the single ring. Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.